When Mia Thompson arrived in Lakeview, she thought she was escaping a life of prejudice for a fresh start. But the rejection she faced at the train station shattered that dream. Abandoned by the man she trusted, humiliated in front of an entire town, she was left with nothing but a trunk full of hopes. But little did the people of Lakeview know, Mia carried with her a secret that could change the fate of the entire town, one that would force them to confront a painful history they had long buried. As the truth began to surface, would Lakeview rise to change, or would it destroy the very foundations it was built on? If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. Mia Thompson stepped off the train, her heart racing with anticipation. The cool morning air of Lakeview, a small town far from the bustling streets of Boston, filled her lungs. She had made this journey for a new beginning, a fresh start away from the city that had never truly accepted her. After months of letters, late-night conversations, and promises of a life free from the prejudice she had faced in Boston, she was finally meeting the man who had captured her heart through words alone. Thomas Willard, the widowed farmer who had written to her with such passion and hope, was waiting at the station. She smoothed her dress and adjusted the delicate hat she had bought just for this moment. Her fingers trembled slightly, but she smiled, eager to meet the man who, in her mind, had already become part of her future. The train had been long and tiring, but the thought of starting a new life in a place where no one knew her, where she wouldn't be judged for the color of her skin, kept her going. Her trunk, filled with her belongings and dreams, stood next to her as she scanned the small platform for him. Finally, she saw him, a man standing awkwardly near the edge of the crowd, clutching a bouquet of flowers that seemed out of place in his large, calloused hands. Thomas Willard was tall, with graying hair and the rough hands of a farmer, but it was his eyes that caught Mia off guard. They were filled with uncertainty, almost as if he hadn't quite expected to see her in person. His gaze flickered over her, then dropped as if he couldn't quite meet her eyes. Mia's heart skipped a beat, but she remained calm, stepping toward him with a smile. "Thomas?" she asked, her voice steady. He looked up at her, and for a moment there was silence between them. The smile she had expected from the man she had corresponded with for months never came. Instead, Thomas seemed to swallow hard, his face turning pale as if he had seen a ghost in broad daylight. His eyes darted nervously around, as if looking for an escape. The bouquet of flowers in his hands drooped, wilting under the pressure of the moment. This isn't going to work," he said, his voice shaky. Mia froze, the words cutting through her like a sharp blade. "What do you mean?" she asked, confused. "You didn't mention that you were black," Thomas stammered, his words stumbling over each other. It was as if he couldn't even bring himself to say it. The weight of his rejection hit Mia like a punch to the gut. She stood there, stunned, her thoughts spinning. She had imagined this moment for so long, had dreamed of this new life, and now it was slipping away from her in the blink of an eye. All the excitement, all the hope she had carried with her for days was gone, shattered by the man standing before her. Her fingers tightened around her trunk's handle, and she struggled to keep her composure. The hat she had worn so carefully, the one she had imagined would be a symbol of her new beginning, now felt ridiculous. She couldn't bring herself to even look at it. The dream she had built in her mind, the one that had kept her going through the long, lonely nights of correspondence, now felt like a cruel joke. "You never asked me," Mia replied quietly, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "You never asked if I was black. You just assumed." Thomas shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting nervously to the ground. "I imagined, I thought you were different," he muttered. His words hung in the air, awkward and empty. "You thought I was different," Mia repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "Different because of the color of my skin? I didn't mean—" Thomas's voice trailed off and he stepped back, holding out the wilting bouquet of flowers as if offering them as an apology. I didn't know. This town, my neighbors, They wouldn't understand. His words stung, each one a reminder of the world she had left behind, the world that had rejected her for simply existing as she was. She had come here hoping for something better, but instead, she found herself standing in front of a man who couldn't see her for who she truly was. Instead, he saw only the color of her skin, and that, it seemed, was enough to make him turn away. "I spent all my savings to get here," Mia said, her voice barely audible but full of quiet strength. "I have nowhere to go back to." Thomas shifted, uncomfortably, and for a moment it seemed as though he might relent. But then, with a quick motion, he reached into his pocket and pulled out some crumpled bills, pressing them into her hand. "This should cover your ticket back to Boston. I'm sure you'll understand." Mia felt a cold chill run down her spine, but it wasn't from the rejection. It was from the anger that simmered within her, silent but powerful. "Understand?" she repeated, her voice rising slightly. "You think money will fix this? Will it erase the hurt you've caused me?" Before Thomas could respond, a voice interrupted the conversation, deep and commanding. "Is that your solution, Willard? Throw money at the problem and hope it goes away like it always does?" The voice belonged to a tall man who had approached from behind, his sharp eyes fixed on Thomas. He was dressed simply but with an air of authority that was impossible to ignore. There was something about him that made Thomas shrink back, as if he were no longer in control of the situation. "This is none of your concern," Thomas muttered, trying to regain his composure. The man stepped forward, his gaze softening as he looked at Mia. "It becomes my concern when I see a man I've known for years act like a coward," he said, his voice calm but filled with conviction. "Allow me to introduce myself," the man continued, turning to Mia. "I'm Samuel Harrison. I own a property just outside the town. I can offer you a place to stay until you decide what to do next." Mia blinked in surprise, unsure of what to make of the stranger's sudden offer. Thomas, however, looked shocked, his face pale as he stepped back. "You can't be serious, Samuel," he protested. "What will people say?" Samuel smiled coldly, his eyes never leaving Thomas. "The same people who do business with me every day, the same people who rely on my land for their livelihood. I'm curious to hear what they would say." For a moment, Thomas said nothing, and then, with a quick glance at Maya, he turned and walked away, leaving her with Samuel. As Thomas disappeared into the distance, Mia turned to Samuel, unsure of what to say. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Samuel replied gently. "Come with me, we'll figure this out together." And so, with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude, Mia followed Samuel Harrison, unsure of what the future held, but knowing that, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't alone. Mia followed Samuel Harrison through the gates of his estate, her mind still spinning from the events at the train station. The anger and hurt from Thomas Willard's rejection still burned in her chest, but Samuel's calm presence offered a sense of comfort she hadn't expected. As they walked along the long gravel driveway, Mia couldn't help but feel a little out of place. She had come to Lakeview looking for a fresh start, but now she was beginning to wonder if her journey was just a detour. Samuel led her past the neatly trimmed hedges and overgrown vines that wrapped around the stately house, a grand Victorian mansion that stood proudly amidst acres of rolling hills and lush green pastures. The property was more than just a home. It was a statement of quiet power, built over years of hard work and careful planning. Mia couldn't help but admire the beauty of it all, though a small part of her felt like an intruder. "This is your new home for as long as you need it," Samuel said, his voice warm and reassuring. He seemed to understand that this wasn't just about providing a roof over her head. It was about giving her a safe space to heal and regroup after the humiliation she had faced. "Don't worry about anything. You're free to stay here without fear of judgment." As they entered the house, Mia was greeted by Mrs. Hathaway, the housekeeper, a middle-aged woman with soft, kind eyes and an air of quiet dignity. Mrs. Hathaway seemed unfazed by Mia's presence, treating her with the same respect and politeness she would offer any guest. "I've prepared the blue room for you," she said, leading Mia up the grand staircase. "It's the best room with a view of the garden." The room was beautiful, far grander than anything Mia had ever imagined for herself. It had tall windows that let in the soft afternoon light, casting a warm glow over the antique furniture and soft blue walls. There was a fireplace in the corner, and the bed, draped in white linens, looked as though it belonged in a fairy tale. For the first time since she had arrived in Lakeview, Mia felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this wasn't the end of her journey after all. Maybe it was the beginning of something new. As Mia unpacked her trunk, she thought about the life she had left behind in Boston. She had been a teacher, dedicated to her students, helping young girls of color find their voices in a world that often silenced them. When the school she worked at closed due to lack of funds, she had decided to take a chance on this new life in Lakeview, hoping for a chance at love, acceptance, and peace. But instead, she had been met with rejection. Her dreams had felt so real, so attainable, and yet they had crumbled in an instant. But as she looked around the blue room, she realized that maybe Lakeview wasn't the failure she had feared it would be. Maybe there was something here for her, something she hadn't yet seen. Over the next few days, Samuel gave her space to adjust. He never pressed her to talk about what had happened at the train station, but he was always there if she needed him. They shared meals in the grand dining room, and Samuel would often tell her stories of the town and the people who lived there. She learned that Samuel had moved to Lakeview years ago, after inheriting the estate from his late father, a wealthy merchant who had built his fortune through hard work and determination. Samuel was a man of principle, a quiet man with a strong sense of justice. His father had taught him the importance of equality and fairness, and he had made it his life's mission to live by those values. Samuel had never been one to bow to societal pressures, and he had always done things his own way, even when it meant facing criticism from the people around him. Mia could see that he was different from the men she had met in Boston, and certainly different from Thomas Willard, who had rejected her so callously. One afternoon, as they sat on the veranda, sipping iced tea and watching the sun begin to set, Samuel turned to her. "You know," he said quietly, "I've lived in Lakeview for many years, but I've never quite felt like I belong here. The town is stuck in the past, held back by old traditions and outdated beliefs." "I know what you mean," Mia replied, her voice thoughtful. "When I first came here, I thought it would be a place where I could escape the discrimination of the city. But instead, I've found myself facing something worse." Samuel nodded. Lakeview has its fair share of people who are resistant to change. They cling to their old ways, and they judge others based on things that don't matter, like the color of their skin. His voice grew darker. "But I won't be like them. I've always believed in fairness and equality for all people, and I won't stand by while others are treated unjustly." Mia was touched by his words. For the first time in days, she felt a sense of belonging, a sense that perhaps there was hope for her in this town after all. But there was still something nagging at her, something she couldn't quite shake off. She had come to Lakeview to escape, to start over. But now she was beginning to realize that her story was far from over. It was only just beginning. That evening, after dinner, Mia retired to her room, feeling the weight of her thoughts. She wandered over to the window, looking out over the sprawling gardens. In the distance, she could see the tall trees lining the horizon, their branches swaying gently in the evening breeze. She thought about the life she had imagined for herself in Lakeview, a life of peace and acceptance. But she also thought about the secret she was carrying, a secret that could change everything. She wasn't sure if she was ready to face it yet, but she knew that someday she would have to. For now, though, Mia was content to take one day at a time. With Samuel's support, she felt stronger than she had in a long time. Maybe, just maybe, Lakeview could be the fresh start she had been looking for after all. And perhaps in time, she would find the peace and acceptance she had always dreamed of. But the journey ahead would not be easy, and the challenges she faced were far from over. Days passed at the Harrison estate, and Maya slowly began to settle into her new life. The constant tension that had gripped her heart since arriving in Lakeview began to ease, though she couldn't shake the feeling that the town was still watching her every move. Samuel Harrison, kind and understanding, had given her the space to recover. But she knew that change wasn't going to come easily to a town like Lakeview. The people here, like many small communities, were set in their ways, and the presence of a woman of color in such an affluent home was something that unsettled them. As time went on, whispers about Mia began to spread throughout the town. Some of the locals couldn't hide their discomfort at the idea of a black woman living so openly among them. At first it was quiet, a glance here, a muttered word there. But soon, it grew louder. Samuel was aware of the gossip, but he refused to let it sway him. "Let them talk," he told Mia one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun sink behind the hills. "They'll get used to it. People are afraid of what they don't understand." Mia didn't share his confidence. She had already felt the sting of rejection once, and she wasn't sure how much more she could take. The people of Lakeview weren't ready for someone like her, and she feared that the small kindnesses she had received from Samuel would be overshadowed by the cold indifference of the rest of the town. The tension came to a head one afternoon when a group of town leaders, including Thomas Willard, arrived unannounced at the estate. Samuel had been in town for a meeting and had left Mia alone for the first time in days. She had spent most of the morning in the library, reading and trying to find a sense of peace in the quiet of the house. When she heard the voices outside, she felt a pang of unease. She recognized the sound of Thomas's voice, and her stomach twisted in knots. Before she could even make it to the door, Thomas and several other men entered the house. They were dressed in their finest clothes, their faces tight with disapproval. Thomas didn't even look at Mia as he addressed Samuel. "We need to talk, Harrison," he said sharply. "This situation has gone far enough." Mia's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped into the hallway, her eyes meeting Thomas's for the first time since their uncomfortable encounter at the train station. His expression was cold, his gaze flicking over her with barely concealed disdain. "We can't allow this," Thomas continued, his voice rising slightly. "This town has its traditions, and it's not going to sit well with the community if you continue to openly associate with her." Samuel stood tall, his posture unwavering. "I don't care what the community thinks. This is my home, and Mia is welcome here." The men exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unprepared for Samuel's defiance. "It's not just your home, Harrison." One of the other men, a local merchant named Gregory, spoke up. "You're not just making a statement for yourself, you're putting all of us in a difficult position. What will the people think? What will happen to our businesses if we tolerate this?" Samuel's jaw tightened, but he didn't back down. "I don't care what people think. What matters is that I've invited Mia into my home, and that's not going to change. If you have a problem with that, I suggest you take it up with me personally." Mia stood quietly in the doorway, the weight of their words sinking in. She had always known that her presence in Lakeview would cause friction, but hearing it so openly, disgust was a painful reminder of the narrow-mindedness that still existed in the town. She wanted to retreat back into the safety of the house, to hide from the harsh reality outside. But something in her wouldn't let her. After a long moment of silence, Mia stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with quiet determination. "I'm not going anywhere," she said, her eyes meeting Thomas's. "I've already been judged by someone who doesn't even know me, and I won't stand by and let that happen again." Thomas's face twisted in frustration, but he said nothing. Instead, he turned on his heel and stormed out of the house, his companions following close behind. Samuel watched them go, his expression unreadable. As the door slammed shut behind them, Mia let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. "Thank you," she said quietly to Samuel, though the words felt inadequate. Samuel gave her a small smile. "You don't need to thank me, they'll get used to it just like everyone else, but I'm proud of you for speaking up." Mia nodded, but the words didn't feel enough. She had done something she never thought she would. She had stood up for herself, for her right to exist in this town. But in doing so, she had opened a door that would be impossible to close. The community of Lakeview wasn't going to let her be accepted so easily. There would be more battles, more challenges, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for them. That night, as Maya sat in her room, staring out at the darkened garden, she made a decision. She wasn't going to be a passive bystander in her own life. She had come to Lakeview seeking peace and acceptance, but she had learned that it wasn't going to come without a fight. The town would have to change, and if it didn't, she would find a way to make it change. Mia had a secret, one that had brought her to Lakeview in the first place. Her grandfather had been a man of great importance, a freed slave who had once owned a large portion of land that had been stolen from him by the very families that now ruled Lakeview. She had the documents, the proof, and the knowledge to expose the truth. But she wasn't going to do it out of anger or revenge. No, Mia knew that this fight had to be about something more, a fight for justice, for equality, and for the future of the town itself. The next morning, Mia gathered the courage to speak with Samuel about what she was planning. She needed him to understand. She needed him to know that she was prepared to do whatever it took to set things right, even if it meant putting everything she had worked for in jeopardy. "There's something you need to know," she said, her voice unwavering. Samuel looked at her, his expression softening. "I'm listening." "I came here for a fresh start," Mia began, her eyes filled with determination. "But I also came here to right a wrong. I have the proof that the land this town is built on was stolen from my grandfather, and I'm going to make sure the truth is known, no matter the cost." Samuel didn't hesitate. "Whatever you need, Mia, I'm with you." And just like that, the battle for justice in Lakeview began. The days that followed Mia's decision to confront the truth were filled with a quiet intensity. She spent hours in the library of the Harrison estate, sifting through old records, land deeds, and historical documents. The weight of what she was doing pressed heavily on her shoulders. The townspeople might have already judged her, but now she was determined to expose the truth no matter the cost. Samuel Harrison stood by her, offering support, but even he knew that this was no small task. The repercussions of revealing the past could shake the very foundations of Lakeview. One morning, as Mia carefully examined a particularly old deed from the 1860s, she came across the smoking gun, an original land grant signed by the governor, granting her great-grandfather, Joseph Freeman, ownership of a substantial portion of land in Lakeview. The document was yellowed with age, its edges frayed, but the signatures were clear. It was the piece of evidence she had been searching for. The land that had once belonged to her family was now held by the wealthiest families in Lakeview, including the Willards, and it was time to set the record straight. The moment she found the deed, she felt a sense of clarity. It wasn't just about correcting the wrongs of the past. It was about changing the future. Lakeview had lived in ignorance of the history beneath their feet for far too long. Now it was time for the truth to surface. Mia knew that it wouldn't be easy, but she was ready to fight for what was right. She had already suffered rejection and scorn. Exposing the truth about the town's past was the only way forward. As she prepared to confront the town, Mia's thoughts turned to Samuel. His unwavering support had been a lifeline, and she couldn't have made it this far without him. He had always believed in fairness and justice, even when it meant going against the tide. Mia knew that, with Samuel by her side, they could bring about the change Lakeview so desperately needed. The town hall meeting was scheduled, and the tension in Lakeview grew palpable. Everyone knew something big was coming, but no one knew exactly what it would be. Whispers filled the streets, and the air felt thick with anticipation. Thomas Willard, along with other town leaders, were preparing their arguments. They had already tried to discredit Mia, but now they were preparing for a full-out battle. The day of the meeting arrived, and the town hall was packed. Local merchants, farmers, and respected community members filled the room, their faces a mix of curiosity, anxiety, and suspicion. Samuel and Mia entered together, drawing the eyes of the entire room. Mia's presence was still unsettling to many, but she held her head high, her expression calm but determined. Samuel stood by her, his support clear in the way he walked beside her, his steady presence offering her strength. As they took their seats, Mia glanced around the room, noting the faces of those who had judged her before. Thomas Willard sat at the front, his arms crossed tightly, his jaw set in a rigid line. He had no idea what was coming, but Mia knew that this meeting would change everything. After the usual formalities, the mayor, a man named Edward Carter, stood up to address the crowd. We are gathered here today to discuss a matter that concerns the future of Lakeview, he began, his voice serious. There have been accusations made that certain land in our town was taken unjustly from its rightful owner. We are here to hear the facts and decide how to move forward. At those words, Mia rose to her feet. The room fell silent, all eyes on her. With a steady breath, Mia stepped forward, her hands gripping the edges of the podium as she prepared to speak. I'm here today not just as a woman of color, but as a descendant of Joseph Freeman, a man who was robbed of the land that should have been his. The land that is now owned by some of you in this room. A murmur ran through the crowd, and Mia could feel the weight of their gazes, but she didn't falter. She reached into her bag and pulled out the documents, pages filled with history, proof of her family's rightful ownership. She laid them out on the table in front of her, each page a testament to the truth. This deed, Mia continued, was signed by the governor in 1866, granting my great-grandfather Joseph Freeman the right to own land in this very town. But in 1870, after a series of violent attempts to drive him off his land, he was forced to flee. The land was taken from him by the founding families of Lakeview, including the Willards, and divided among them. Thomas's face turned pale as he looked at the documents, and for the first time, Mia saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. The room was tense, everyone waiting for the next move. But Mia was resolute. She wasn't looking for revenge. She was seeking justice. I'm not here to tear this town apart, Mia said, her voice growing stronger. I'm here to right a historical wrong. I propose the creation of a community foundation, funded by the recovered land, that will serve the people of Lakeview. This is not about one person or one family. It's about the future of this town. It's about creating a place where everyone, no matter their background, can thrive. The crowd sat in stunned silence. Samuel watched from the back of the room, his pride for Mia swelling with every word she spoke. This was no longer just about reclaiming land. It was about building a community that could heal and move forward together. But some in the room weren't ready for such a change. This is absurd. Thomas Willard stood up, his voice shaking with anger. You can't just come in here and change everything. This town's foundation is built on these families' hard work. Hard work? Mia interrupted, her voice steady and unyielding. It's built on stolen land and stolen lives. There was a sharp intake of breath from the crowd. Thomas looked around the room, his face contorted with disbelief. But no, one spoke up to defend him. The weight of the truth hung in the air. Just then, a lawyer entered the room, a respected figure from a neighboring town. The documents presented by Miss Freeman have been verified, he said, cutting through the tension. They are authentic. The land was wrongfully taken, and the history of Lakeview must be acknowledged. With that, the crowd erupted into murmurs, and Mia knew the battle was far from over. But as the mayor called for a vote on Mia's proposal, she felt a quiet sense of hope settle in her heart. This was the beginning of something new. The seeds of change had been planted, and there was no turning back. Weeks later, the first steps toward justice were taken. The community foundation was established, funding projects for education, healthcare, and affordable housing. Mia became a symbol of resilience, not as someone who sought revenge, but as someone who sought to restore balance. And as Lakeview began to heal, the legacy of her great-grandfather was finally honored. In the years that followed, Lakeview transformed. The once divided town began to embrace its diversity, understanding that it was stronger when it worked together. And Mia, with Samuel by her side, had played a key role in shaping that future. For the first time, Mia truly felt like she belonged. Her legacy and the legacy of her grandfather would live on, not in anger or regret, but in the hope that change was possible, and that even in the face of great adversity, dignity and truth could prevail.